The rain had just ended when Emily Carter stepped out of her small blue car and shut the door behind her. The soft drizzle had left the town streets glistening under the streetlights. And the quiet air carried that clean smell that comes after a storm. She pulled her gray coat tighter, balancing a bag of returned books against her side as she walked quickly toward the library's entrance. It was late, almost closing time, and the librarian would probably give her that gentle smile that meant, "You're lucky I'm still here." Emily worked most days at the Willow Creek Bakery, where mornings started before sunrise and ended long after the smell of bread left her hair. The job was tiring but comforting. She liked the rhythm of it, the warmth, and the small kindnesses from customers who became familiar faces. But when she felt the world pressing too hard, when loneliness crept in, the library was her quiet escape. The library was nearly empty when she entered. The lights were dimmer than usual, and only a few readers remained scattered among the aisles. The sound of the rain dripping from the roof outside echoed softly through the room. Emily returned her books at the counter, exchanged a smile with the librarian, and started toward her favorite section, the far corner by the tall window, where she could read in peace. But as she turned the last shelf, she stopped. Someone was sitting there at first. She didn't recognize him. He was sitting on one of the old wooden chairs, head bent forward, hands covering his face. There was a small pile of papers on the table in front of him, and a single lamp above cast a warm glow that made the whole scene feel strangely private. When he finally lifted his head slightly, Emily's breath caught. It was Daniel Reed, her neighbor from across the street. Daniel was a man she'd seen countless times, mowing his lawn on weekends, collecting his mail in the evenings, or fixing something in his garage with his sleeves rolled up. He was quiet, polite, and always gave a small nod when their eyes met. But that was all. He seemed like the kind of man who kept his world perfectly contained. No noise, no drama, no unnecessary words. But tonight, that image was broken. He looked lost. His eyes were red, and there was a tightness around his mouth that only pain could shape. Emily hesitated, unsure what to do. She didn't want to intrude on someone's private moment. But something deep inside her, the part that noticed small details, the part that understood quiet sadness, told her this wasn't something she could just walk past. She took a small step forward. "Daniel," she said softly. He looked up quickly, startled, almost like he hadn't realized anyone was there. His voice came out rough. "Oh, Emily, I didn't see you." He straightened a little, wiping at his eyes as if trying to erase what she had just seen. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, offering a gentle smile. "I was just returning some books." He nodded, trying to find steadiness. "No, it's fine. I just needed a quiet place." She could have left it at that. She could have smiled politely, grabbed a random book from the shelf, and pretended not to notice anything. But something about the way his voice broke on the word "needed" made her pause. "Do you want me to leave you alone?" she asked. Daniel gave a weak laugh, not unkind, but tired. "No, it's all right. I guess I just look like a mess right now." Emily stepped closer and sat in the chair across from him. Everyone looks like a mess sometimes, even the quiet ones. He looked at her for a long second, as if trying to decide whether to speak or stay silent. His eyes softened slightly. "It's been a rough evening," he admitted. "One of those nights where the past catches up with you." Emily didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. The pain in his tone said enough. Instead, she nodded. "Those nights can feel heavier than they should." Daniel exhaled slowly, as if the air had been trapped in his chest for hours. "You ever open a box you wish you'd kept closed?" Emily tilted her head. "Once or twice." Gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, me too." For a while, they sat quietly. The library was closing soon, but neither of them moved. The clock ticked softly, and outside, the rain started again, gentle this time, almost comforting. Emily watched him, wondering what kind of hurt could make a man look that way. Not broken, but carrying something too heavy for too long. She wanted to ask, but she also knew the wrong question could close him off completely. So instead, she said, sometimes saying I'm fine is just a way to stop people from looking too close. Daniel glanced up, surprised. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess you're right. He looked down again at the papers on the table. A few letters, a small photograph, and what looked like a notebook. Emily noticed the picture. A woman with kind eyes smiling beside Daniel. She didn't ask who it was, but the answer sat between them unspoken. She leaned back slightly. You know, you don't have to talk about it if it hurts too much. Daniel's voice dropped low. It always hurts. I just pretend it doesn't. That line stayed in the air, heavy and fragile. Emily didn't know why she stayed. Maybe it was empathy. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the way loneliness recognizes itself in another person. Whatever it was, she couldn't bring herself to leave. She reached out, touching the edge of the table with her fingertips, close enough for him to feel her quiet presence. You're not alone tonight, she said softly, even if you don't say a word. Daniel looked up again, and this time his expression changed. The sharpness in his eyes softened into something more human. Gratitude, maybe. Or relief. Thank you, he said. It was barely more than a whisper. They sat like that for another minute. Two strangers connected not by words, but by a shared silence that said more than either could explain. When the librarian called out that it was time to close, Daniel gathered his things slowly. Emily stood too, hesitating before speaking. If you ever need someone to talk to or just company, I live right across the street. He nodded. I know. I might take you up on that someday. As she stepped out into the rain, Emily glanced back once more through the glass doors. Daniel was still sitting there, staring at the photograph. But this time, he didn't look entirely alone. Driving home, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes, that mixture of pain and quiet hope. She didn't know why it affected her so deeply. Maybe because she'd seen her own reflection in that sadness. Maybe because something about him made her want to help. Even if she didn't fully understand why. That night, she lay in bed listening to the rain on her window, her mind replaying the moment she saw him for the first time, truly saw him. She couldn't explain it, but she knew something had shifted, and deep down, Emily felt it. This wasn't the last time she'd see Daniel read like that. Something had begun between them, something unexpected and fragile. A quiet story that had just taken its first breath. The following days passed quietly, but Emily Carter couldn't get Daniel Reed out of her mind. Every time she looked across the street and saw his porch light on, she wondered if he was all right. She told herself not to think too much. He was just a neighbor, someone she'd barely known. But sometimes, people who hardly know you see what others don't. And that's what had happened that night in the library. A week later, she saw him again. It was early evening, and Emily was coming home from work, the smell of fresh bread still clinging to her coat. The sky was turning gold when she noticed Daniel sitting on his porch steps, staring at something in his hands. For a moment, she thought about walking straight inside. But then he looked up and caught her gaze. He gave a small smile, tired but real. Emily hesitated only for a second before walking across the street. Hey, she said softly, stopping at the edge of his porch. Mind if I sit? He nodded. Please. I was just thinking too much again. She sat beside him, careful not to crowd his space. That can be dangerous, she said lightly, hoping to make him smile. He did faintly. Yeah, especially when you're thinking about things that don't have answers anymore. Emily glanced at what he was holding, a thin, leather-bound notebook. Is that what you had the other night at the library? He nodded slowly. It belonged to my wife. Emily's breath caught. The words felt heavy in the air. She had guessed something like that before, but hearing it confirmed made it real. Daniel didn't look at her when he spoke next. Her name was Claire. She was everything I wasn't. Outgoing, brave, always laughing. We were married for 7 years. He paused, his voice growing quieter. She got sick, and it all happened so fast. One day we were planning a trip to the coast, and a few months later I was sitting alone in the hospital room. Emily felt a sharp ache in her chest. She didn't interrupt, just listened. Something told her that was all he needed. "I thought I handled it," he went on. "I went back to work, did everything people said I should do. Stay busy. Move forward. Focus on the good memories. But grief doesn't follow rules. It hides. Then one day, it hits you again, and you're right back where you started." He opened the notebook slowly. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, small notes, thoughts, lists, even doodles. She used to write down everything, Daniel said. Every thought, every plan. She believed in capturing moments. "I found this in a box yesterday, hidden under some of her old scarves. I thought I was ready to read it." Emily's voice was soft. "Were you?" He gave a small, sad smile. "Not even close." They sat in silence for a moment. The street was quiet except for the sound of crickets and a distant dog barking. The sun had slipped lower, painting the houses in warm orange light. Emily didn't know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt right. "She must have loved you deeply." Daniel looked down at the notebook. "She did. And I loved her more than I ever said out loud. That's what hurts most, all the things left unsaid." Emily nodded, her eyes gentle. "We all think we have more time than we really do." He closed the notebook, his fingers tightening around it. "I didn't mean for you to see me like that at the library. I don't usually fall apart in public." "You didn't fall apart?" Emily said quietly. "You just remembered? That's not weakness." Daniel glanced at her, his eyes softening. "You remind me of her sometimes," he said, after a pause. "Not in how you look, just in the way you speak. Calm, kind. She had that way of making silence feel safe." Emily felt warmth rise in her chest. She didn't know what to say, so she smiled faintly. "That's a nice thing to be compared to." He chuckled softly. "It is. Thank you for staying that night. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to talk to until you were there." "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "You just seemed like you needed someone to listen." He nodded, looking down the street. "You know what's strange? Everyone around me seems to have moved on. Friends, family, coworkers. They still check in, but their lives kept going. Mine kind of stopped for a while." Emily understood that feeling more than she expected. She'd had her own quiet heartbreak years ago, one she never talked about. Maybe that's why she couldn't stop caring about this man, because his silence sounded familiar. "You can't rush healing," she said. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is let it move slowly." Daniel turned to her, his gaze steady. "Do you believe people can heal completely?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe not completely, but I think we can learn to live with the scars. And sometimes, if we're lucky, someone helps make them hurt less." Daniel looked at her, then really looked. The air between them felt different. Not romantic yet, not even close to that, but gentle. Like something new was beginning quietly. Without either of them naming it, after a long silence, he stood up and said, "Would you like some tea? I think I've got more than enough for two." Emily smiled and followed him inside. His house was simple, clean, and filled with small details that still carried his wife's touch. Framed photos, soft curtains, and a vase of dried flowers on the table. He poured tea for both of them, and they talked not about loss anymore, but about small, ordinary things. The conversation was slow but comforting. It's the kind that makes time feel softer. As she left that evening, Daniel walked her to the porch. The air was cool, the moon low over the trees. "Thank you for coming over," he said quietly. "It feels strange, but good. Talking again." Emily smiled. "You don't have to thank me. Friends talk. That's what they do." He hesitated for a moment. "Friends," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Yeah, I'd like that." When Emily crossed the street back to her house, she glanced over her shoulder once more. Daniel was still standing there, one hand resting on the porch rail, watching her go. For a brief second, their eyes met under the streetlight. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but something about it made her heart beat a little faster. Inside her home, she made herself a cup of cocoa and sat by the window, watching his light flicker through the curtains. She didn't know why this mattered so much, why she suddenly cared if he was smiling again. But she did. That night, Daniel opened his wife's notebook once more. Between the pages, he found something he hadn't seen before. A short note written in her handwriting. If you ever feel lost, let someone find you. Don't live in shadows forever. He read the line over and over, thinking of Emily, the woman who saw him at his lowest and didn't turn away. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something that almost scared him. Hope. He closed the notebook, exhaled deeply, and whispered to the quiet room. Maybe I'm ready to be found again. Cross the street. Emily switched off her lamp, unaware that in helping him remember love, she had just begun to rediscover it herself. The next few weeks slipped by quietly, and life in the small town went back to its usual rhythm. Emily Carter still worked her long shifts at the bakery, serving coffee and croissants to familiar faces. But her thoughts often drifted across the street to Daniel Reed, the man she had come to know in pieces, slowly, like reading a book one page at a time. They spoke often now, a few words exchanged over mailboxes, short visits on Sunday mornings, and sometimes long talks over tea that stretched into the night. Daniel seemed lighter these days. He laughed more, smiled easier, and the sadness in his eyes wasn't as sharp as before. Emily was happy to see it, though a small part of her heart began to feel something she didn't expect, something gentle, cautious, and quietly growing. One cold morning, Emily woke early to do her shopping. The air was crisp, and frost had formed delicate patterns on her car windows. She pulled on her gloves, grabbed her grocery bag, and stepped outside. Across the street, Daniel's front door was slightly open. She almost ignored it, assuming he was airing out the house. But something about the stillness made her stop. She walked a little closer, careful not to intrude. The morning light spilled through the open door, and she could see Daniel sitting on the floor of his living room. A soft melody played from a small speaker. Something slow and old, the kind of music that carried memories. Daniel didn't notice her. He was holding the same leather-bound notebook, his wife's journal, open in his lap. His head was slightly bowed, but he wasn't crying this time. He was smiling. A faint, wistful smile that looked both painful and peaceful at once. Emily froze by the doorway, watching him quietly. There was something deeply human about that moment. The way he seemed lost between sorrow and acceptance. She didn't mean to watch, but she felt like she was witnessing something sacred, something fragile that words couldn't touch. Then Daniel lifted his head and saw her. For a heartbeat, they both froze. Emily's cheeks warmed with embarrassment, and she opened her mouth to apologize. But Daniel spoke first. His voice was calm, gentle. "You caught me." Emily smiled nervously. "I didn't mean to. The door was open, and I just wanted to make sure you were all right." He stood slowly, closing the notebook. "No need to apologize. I guess I left the door open without realizing it." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You looked peaceful, like you were remembering something good." Daniel gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Yeah, I was reading one of her notes. She used to write little things to herself, reminders, quotes, wishes. Today I found one that said, 'When you start to smile again, don't feel guilty.'" Emily's eyes softened. "That's beautiful." "It is," he said quietly. And for the first time, I read it without breaking down. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by sunlight streaming through the window. Emily could see a warmth in Daniel's face that hadn't been there before. His grief hadn't vanished, but it had softened, shaped into something he could finally hold without it hurting so much. "Do you want to come in?" he asked suddenly. "I was just making coffee." She hesitated, then nodded. Inside, his home felt brighter than the last time she'd visited. There were still traces of sadness, the untouched photo frames, the empty space beside the couch, but the atmosphere felt different. Lighter as Daniel poured coffee. Emily noticed small changes, fresh flowers on the table, a new stack of books on the shelf, even a candle burning faintly on the counter. It looked like someone who was trying to live again. "This place feels different," she said softly. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, I guess I've been trying to make it feel more like a home again. For a long time, I treated it like a memory I couldn't touch. But lately," he paused, looking at her. Lately, it feels okay to move a few things around." Emily returned his smile. "That's a good sign." They sat together, sipping their coffee. The silence was comfortable, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Daniel spoke again, almost in a whisper. "I didn't expect you to become part of this journey." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, I didn't plan on letting anyone in. I thought I was done with connections, with opening up. But then you showed up at the library that night, and somehow I stopped pretending everything was fine." Emily's heart tightened. Maybe it was just timing. You were ready to talk, and I happened to be there. Daniel shook his head gently. "No, it's more than that. You listened. Most people try to fix pain with advice, but you didn't. You just stayed." His words lingered between them. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, the kind that wasn't just gratitude, but something deeper. She tried to hide it behind a soft smile. Sometimes staying is all someone needs. He looked at her, really looked, with an expression that made her heart skip. "You've helped more than you know." For a few seconds, the room was silent except for the faint music still playing in the background. The sunlight glowed on Daniel's face, highlighting the quiet strength that had begun to return to him. Emily stood to leave after a while, not wanting to make things heavy. But before she reached the door, Daniel spoke again. "Emily." She turned back. He hesitated, his voice softer now. "When I saw you at the door earlier, I didn't feel embarrassed. For the first time, I didn't mind being seen." Emily's eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. There was something honest and pure in that silence, a kind of unspoken understanding that went beyond words. She smiled gently. "Maybe that's because you're healing." "Maybe it's because someone helped me remember how," he replied, as she stepped outside. The wind carried the smell of coffee and old pages behind her. She walked home with her heart strangely full, unsure what this new feeling was: friendship, compassion, or something quietly turning into love. That night, as she sat by her window, she saw Daniel again. He was on his porch, looking up at the sky, a small lamp beside him, and that familiar notebook resting on his lap. But this time, he wasn't reading it. He was just sitting there, calm, alive. At peace. Emily smiled to herself. She didn't know what the future held, whether their paths would stay side by side or drift apart. But she knew one thing for certain. She had witnessed something rare that morning. The moment a heart begins to heal, and though she had only meant to check on a neighbor, she had caught him in a moment that changed both of them, a moment that quietly marked the beginning of something new. Across the street, Daniel glanced toward her house. Their eyes met for the briefest second through the window, and they both smiled. Small, knowing smiles that didn't need words, he whispered to himself, almost like a promise, "I'm okay now." And somewhere deep inside, Emily felt that he truly was, and maybe, for the first time in a long while, so was she. The weeks that followed that quiet morning carried a new rhythm, simple, gentle, and warm. Emily Carter and Daniel Reed began to see each other more often, not through chance anymore, but by choice. Their friendship grew naturally, without plans or promises, like sunlight slowly filling a cold room. There was no rush, no dramatic moment, just small things: shared coffee, afternoon walks, and quiet talks that stretched into evenings. Daniel had changed. The heavy silence that once surrounded him had softened. He smiled more often now, sometimes for no reason at all. He still carried his memories, but they no longer ruled his days. Emily could see it in the way he spoke, calmer, lighter, free in small ways that weren't possible before. One Sunday, Emily found herself standing in her kitchen, staring out the window as Daniel worked in his garden. The early summer light painted everything gold, and there was something peaceful about the scene, the sound of his shovel, the wind moving through the trees, the faint hum of life returning. Without thinking, she crossed the street. "Need help?" she asked, holding 2 cups of lemonade. Daniel smiled, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Only if you know how to keep plants alive. I've already killed 3 of these." Emily laughed and handed him a cup. "I'm not much better, but maybe 2 mistakes make a right." They sat down on the grass, side by side, sipping lemonade. The air smelled of freshly turned soil and cut grass. For a while, they just sat in silence, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. Daniel spoke first. I didn't think I'd ever enjoy a day like this again. For a long time, even good weather made me feel guilty, like I wasn't supposed to be happy when she wasn't here. Emily turned to him, her voice soft. And now? He looked around at the garden, at the sky, at her. Now it feels okay to smile. She'd probably want that. Emily nodded. I think she would. He studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You've become an important part of my days, Emily. I don't know if I've said that enough. She smiled faintly. You don't have to. I know. He hesitated, then said quietly, It's strange. The person who helped me find peace wasn't someone I knew for years. It was someone who just showed up one rainy night. Emily looked down at her hands, her heart beating faster. Sometimes the right people walk into your life exactly when you need them. You just don't realize why until later. They shared a small smile, one that said more than words ever could. In the weeks that followed, their connection deepened. They spent evenings on Daniel's porch talking about books, music, and dreams that once felt too far away. Sometimes they said very little, just sat in quiet companionship. Listening to the night, Emily often caught herself looking at Daniel when he wasn't watching. The way he listened carefully, the way he smiled at small things, the way he looked at the world now with calm acceptance, it drew her in. But she kept her feelings quiet, unsure if it was right to speak them. One evening, as the sky turned deep orange, Daniel called out from his porch. Emily, come see this sunset. You'll like it. She crossed the street barefoot, holding a light sweater. The horizon was painted in gold and rose. It's the kind of beauty that made the world stop for a moment. Daniel stood beside her, hands in his pockets. It looks different when you have someone to share it with, he said quietly. Emily turned to him. Everything does. For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't sudden or overwhelming. It was soft, real, and full of quiet meaning. Daniel took a small step closer. Not out of boldness, but out of gratitude, respect, and a tenderness that had grown over time. Emily, he said softly, you helped me heal. You helped me remember what kindness feels like. She looked at him, her voice gentle. Maybe we helped each other. He smiled, that same faint smile she had first seen in the library months ago, but now it carried warmth instead of sorrow. You caught me when I was falling apart, he said, and you stayed long enough to help me find myself again. The air around them was still. Emily's heart felt heavy and light all at once. I think we both needed someone to stay, she whispered. Daniel reached out, hesitated for just a second, then gently took her hand. His touch was careful, not as a man chasing love, but as someone learning how to trust the world again. They stood there quietly, watching the last light fade from the sky. Neither spoke about what would happen next. There were no grand promises, no declarations, just the comfort of being two people who had found peace in each other's company. In the days that followed, their lives blended naturally. Emily still worked at the bakery, and Daniel began painting again, something he hadn't done since before his wife's illness. Sometimes she'd stop by his porch to find him lost in his sketches, and he'd show her what he was working on with shy pride. Other times, he'd bring her fresh coffee in the morning, leaving it on her doorstep with a note that simply said, "Have a good day." Their bond wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about beginning again, not with the excitement of new love, but the gentleness of two hearts that had learned the value of healing. One late evening, as they sat on his porch, wrapped in quiet conversation, Daniel said something that stayed with her forever. You know, he murmured, grief doesn't leave. It just changes shape. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone comes along who helps you carry it differently. Emily squeezed his hand and smiled. Then I'm glad I was that person. He looked at her, eyes warm. You were more than that, Emily. You were the reminder that life still has beautiful moments waiting. The night air was cool, filled with the sound of crickets. They stayed there a long time, listening to people who had found a quiet understanding beyond words. As the stars appeared, Emily leaned her head gently on his shoulder. Daniel didn't move. He simply exhaled and let the calm settle around them. It wasn't the beginning of a dramatic love story. It was something softer, something real. A story of finding light again after darkness, of choosing to open one's heart. When it's easier to close it forever, Emily thought back to that rainy evening in the library, the night she had seen him sitting alone, broken and silent. She never imagined that simple act of compassion would lead to this moment. Daniel smiled faintly, looking up at the stars. "I used to think love ended when someone left," he said. "But now I think it just changes where it lives." Emily closed her eyes, whispering, "Sometimes it finds a new home." And there, under the soft night sky, surrounded by peace and gentle understanding, they sat to people who had once been strangers, now quietly holding on to the life they'd both thought they'd lost. Healing had turned into something deeper, and love, calm, patient, and kind, had quietly found its way back to them both.